Good evening, folks. We'll call the meeting to order. This meeting takes place in the traditional and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. There's no additions or deletions to the agenda that I'm aware of. So approval of the agenda. 4.1, recommendation that committee of the whole approve the agenda for the May 5th, 2026 meeting as presented. Moved by Councilor Strong, second by Councilor Babineau. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried unanimous. 5.1, recommendation that the committee of the whole approve the minutes from the April 7th, 2026 meeting as presented. Is there a mover? Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilor Fullerton. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried unanimous. Now we're right into 6.1, and it's a residential rental market survey and housing needs assessment.
So since Mark's not here this evening, I'll take this file. So council, tonight in front of you is the 2025 residential rental market survey. So this was noted that it was a partnership with the region to look at rental rates across Lunenburg County as a representative to identify affordable housing and targets within that scope. Provided to you here is the Turner Drake report. Council did attend a meeting of the region, but requested a meeting to look at specifically Lunenburg and what the report actually represents for us. And tonight we do have Colin Rennie from Turner Drake that will be presenting online. And there he is. Colin, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you guys. Can you guys hear me okay?
Council, you okay? Yeah, so Colin, we just introduced the reports and yourself to present on behalf of Turner Drake on the section on Lunenburg. So the floor is yours.
All right, I'm gonna try to get the screen share going here and we'll see if that works out. All right, can you guys see the presentation okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna be staring at the middle screen here, so if I'm looking off camera, that's why. Yeah, so thanks for having me in here today. I'm going to do a little recap of the research that we looked into and the results of our housing market study and rental market stuff, and a few points specific to town of Lunenburg. Yeah, just a bit of background. Turner Drake, we're out of Halifax, commercial real estate consultancy. We do a whole host of housing consulting, housing research, market analysis, market surveys, and we were also the lead author for all 50 of the 2023 province-wide housing needs assessment reports. So that would have included one for town of Lunenburg as well. Just a couple things before we get going on this specific project. Just want to thank all the staff that were involved from Chester, Lunenburg, Mahone Bay, Bridgewater, and Model. You guys were all great to work with. And as well, we just want to thank all the property managers, building operators, and various people in the industry and stakeholders who spoke with us throughout this research. Yeah, so we're just going to go over a couple things on the background of the project, kind of higher order findings, and then some stuff specifically about Lunenburg, and then some of the bigger picture themes and trends that we saw out of our research. And so key background for this project was to get rental market info for 5 jurisdictions in Lunenburg County through a wide-ranging outreach and rental market survey, along with updated metrics to the 2023 housing needs assessments for the 5 municipalities in the county. And that covered demographic analysis, population forecasting, a lot of trends in that regard, and then a review of affordability and housing supply issues in the 5 jurisdictions. As a bit of background as to why that rental market analysis piece of it was kind of like the driving factor behind this project. It's because rural and small town NS have a major data gap, major lack of reliable and available rental market information. And that's actually a big hurdle for housing development, housing planning, regulatory research. Non-market, nonprofit groups struggle with this. Funders, project lenders, banks, CMHC, whatnot, they all require market rental info as part of their funding calculations, and rural areas, small town areas too, lack this info. And in particular, CMHC, their market reporting on the residential side doesn't cover anything in Lunenburg County. So you're left with a pretty wide range of wide part of the province that doesn't have reliable residential market data. And that's where we were brought on, and that's where our role in the project really came to be, was to go and flush out that info, quantify that, and to establish what the rental market looks like throughout the county and in the small towns as well. And to put some really like some reliable numbers behind that to give policymakers, private sector, and non-market groups something that they could take to lenders, something they could use for their own inputs and their own research, funding calculations, and the like. Another point of context, just before we get going further into the presentation, because I will refer to these a lot. Generally, there's two types of market rental housing. There's primary market, secondary market. Primary market is focused on purpose-built rental apartments and buildings that have 3 or more units. So that's your traditional apartment building, larger townhouse developments, and the like. Basically, these are things that are purpose-built for the residential rental market. And then the secondary market is units in smaller buildings. So if you think someone has a basement suite they rent out, or a single family home that's for rent, a flat above a commercial space, things along those regards, that's what would be referred to typically as the secondary market in terms of like rental research and the like. And these are buildings that usually have less than 3 units, and they have a much higher prevalence in rural areas and smaller towns. Yeah, so sorry for that kind of overload of info there, but we're trying to keep this quick. We're going to go through some of the higher order findings and results and what we did for the rental market survey. And not everything in this particular section is specific to the town of Lunenburg, but also do bear in mind that as we go into the findings from this, that these themes and these higher order trends apply kind of writ large throughout the county. And so for some background on like what we did, like what a rental market survey is, it's an outreach process, and it's a research process that's used in commercial real estate research to quantify rental market metrics. So think like vacancy, rent, demand, supply, and the such. And basically you go out, you talk to people, and you get information straight from participants in the market. CMHC does these on an annual basis for qualifying jurisdictions. They have a set population threshold for that, and they go out and they talk to landlords, and they get rental rolls and lease data and stuff, and use that to quantify vacancy, rent, and such. And we've been doing these types of projects and this type of outreach for about 20 plus years now, for both residential properties and residential properties, urban, small town, rural, whatever you name it. We do this pretty frequently, where we go out and we quantify a bunch of stuff that's really not that readily available. And so in terms of our work on this project, we did a ton of direct outreach to landlords, property management firms, developers, builders, whatnot throughout the county. A whole ton of phone calls, emails, a bunch of in-person meetings. We went down to Lunenburg a couple times and met with some groups there. Set up a standardized data collection process to go through, take in all the info that we were getting, record it, retain it, use it, process it. And we took, where we could, building level info on unit mixes, vacancy, rental rates, asking rates, unit types, for anything that we could identify as a rental property in the county. And we used all this info to derive localized and regional market figures for affordability thresholds, rental rates, vacancy rates, supply, and such. We started out, in order to do this, we built an inventory of what we could ID as rental properties in the county. We started out with contact info that the various municipalities had on file via fire inspection records, building permit records, and the like. And then we took that and we cross-referenced it with stuff that we had internally, along with bulk data sources from the province. So think like assessment rolls, ownership data, and such. And then we kind of standardized it all, broke it out, and started reaching out to people. And this generally went on from late June, early July until September of last year, so 2025. The bulk of our research, we tried to focus on the primary rental market. So that's what I was talking about earlier, in that those are larger purpose-built rental buildings. So stuff that has at least 3 units and is really geared to that purpose-built renter side. And we targeted that side of it mainly because that's what non-market groups and project funders need. And that's what they wanted out of this type of research, is that they wanted metrics that reflected the purpose-built rental market. But that being said, we did substantiate this and did supplement the research with kind of outreach to people involved in the secondary market where appropriate. So definitely in the smaller towns, so we did cover a substantial base of secondary market properties in Lunenburg, as well as the rural areas, to try to round out that sample for us. All our calculations were done with industry standard statistical processes. All the countywide figures, we're super confident on the response rate on those. They can be relied upon for a whole host of research and planning purposes. And we generally advise that the municipal level data that was submitted to all 5 jurisdictions best used for local trends, local reporting, local nuances. We do need to flag that in these results, a small sample size bias can kind of skew more granular figures for some of the local contexts. And that's just because it's just a smaller market overall. So, one building, its rates can have an outsized impact on the whole. And in terms of our coverage, because this was an outreach process, we did have to rely on people talking to us. And that was, several months of calling, leaving voicemails, emails, and whatnot. In town of Lunenburg specifically, we were able to successfully get info for just under 60% of the primary market inventory in the town. That was actually one of the higher figures we had, and countywide, it was just under 65% of all primary market units in the county were covered by our survey. So you can rest assured that the data you guys got was highly representative and usable and actually reflected like on the ground realities. And yeah, so a couple of the findings and some of the higher order trends that we were able to flush out from our research. Again, not specific to town of Lunenburg yet, but these trends and these kind of things that we discuss here and we show here are applicable across the board in the county. That's just the results of what we looked at. Is these apply no matter where or no matter the jurisdiction. Countywide vacancy rate was just about 4.5%, but that also only represented 70 units across the board. And the biggest takeaway we had from that front is we looked into that, drilled that down a bit. And if you excluded the vacant units that were in new construction buildings in the county, that took out over half of all vacant units. That means that pretty much anything that's available in the county is concentrated in that higher end of the market, those newer build segments. And the availability in the market-based affordable rental stock was effectively non-existent through our research. Result of that is that there's a big lack of mid-range rental options available to rental households right now. And there's low vacancy, low availability, and really high demand relative to the existing supply in the county. Another big trend that we saw through our research was that there's been a major split developed between what people are currently paying if you're a tenant and what an asking rate for a unit would be. So what a new tenant would be faced with if they were going to lease the unit today. And that's been driven by higher achievable rental rates over time as demand increased and supply wasn't able to catch up, as well as increased operating costs pushed that rental rate threshold higher and higher. At the same time, there's a limited availability in the rental stock, and there's not a whole lot of places if you're a current renter that you can go, which means that there's really no turnover and people aren't moving as much if they're already renting. They want to stay in that unit because it's more affordable for them. It's it's their home, whatever you. That results in low availability. And that lack of turnover basically forces that split between what you're currently paying and what you would be paying to an even higher point. Another key point that we flushed out through the research is that there is a shortage and a lack of a critical mass of purpose-built rental inventory and rental units. So that's that primary market, purpose-built rental apartments. The bulk of the county's rental stock is in Bridgewater, and it's not even close. And outside of Bridgewater, in those existing, and even in Bridgewater too, in existing primary market rental buildings, there's quite low vacancy and quite limited turnover. And in the rural areas, there is almost no vacancy that we were able to record in purpose-built rentals in the rural parts of the county. Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit, and in terms of what we were able to see through our research, as it related to like what's been driving up rental rates over the past little while. Basically, it's lower vacancy, more people moved in, population went up, higher demand, and a supply that didn't keep pace. Combined with higher operating costs, be it construction increase or construction costs, maintenance costs, utilities, property taxes, what have you. Rental operators, they need to keep their buildings financially sustainable, and the rental rates that they're going to charge are going to reflect what it costs to keep the lights on. And in conjunction with higher costs and higher demand, basically that pushed that rent floor up. And then the higher achievable rental rates, be it through some of those higher order market conditions, have validated the costs required for unit renovations, unit conversions. So as a unit turns over, oftentimes landlords are seeing that they could sink a bunch into repositioning the unit, renovating it, and then moving it up the price spectrum and being able to achieve a higher rental premium. All that kind of compounded and has pushed rents up and up and up through the county. And on a bit of a positive note, though, there has been a lot of like recently added supply, particularly in Bridgewater, that has helped to accommodate pent-up rental demand throughout the county. And a lot of the people that we spoke with, a lot of the data that we were able to access indicated that there's been kind of like a bit of a leveling and a bit of a cooling process in the rental market over the past year or so. It doesn't mean that rents are falling. It just means that things in the immediate and in the near term have kind of leveled off a bit. That being said, rental rates for new construction for a whole host of reasons are quite likely unobtainable at the income threshold of many renter tenured households. But in spite of this, there is still demand for those higher end units and an expanded range of rental options at the high end of the market. And even though they're not necessarily affordable directly and in the immediate, that newer supply does help over the long run to relieve pressure on older stock and mid-range inventory. All right, so I just threw a whole ton at you. Sorry for trying to just like get through that as quick as possible, but we're gonna go into some points from the Lunenburg specific context. A lot of the themes are going to be the same. And again, at the end, if you guys have any questions or anything like that, feel free to make a note of them and we can go over them afterwards. Yeah, biggest takeaways from our research for town of Lunenburg was really low availability and high demand for purpose-built rentals. I know you've already heard me say that, but that was particularly acute in the town. Our survey only clocked 6 vacant units in the town during the research process, and a few of those were in buildings that have recently undergone a renovation. So basically what that means is there's next to nothing available at the time that we did the research. The bulk of the rental supply, kind of writ large in the town, and particularly at that purpose or in that purpose-built rental segment, was either at the low end or the high end of the spectrum. There was really nothing available in the town in that mid-range on the price scale. It was pretty much either really old stock or really high-end new stuff. Another thing that we found in Lunenburg was that secondary rentals, so think like flats above commercial spots, single family homes and whatnot, often carried a pretty high premium relative to some of their counterparts. And that price premium, we looked into it, and it's basically as a result of higher operating costs, so higher utilities, more expensive to heat the spot, what have you, along with the higher costs required to purchase a site like that and then renovate it and reposition it and bring it onto the rental market. When we did the research, Lunenburg's average rent was just north of 1,300, and vacancy rate was just north of 3.6. It's in the report. I left the specific figures out of this, but there is a major affordability problem for renter households, and the vast majority of renter households in the town of Lunenburg would be unable to afford most of the county's rental stock at its asking price points. And then, of course, just with a slight caveat on the market figures, so that rental rate, vacancy rate, and other figures specific to the town in the report, there's a small sample size bias that's driven just by the smaller size of the Lunenburg market. So some specific buildings can have more of an outsized impact on the overarching results. At the time that we did so, at the time of the report, and so just last fall, the net unit shortage, housing unit shortage in Lunenburg was just around 100 units. And we had forecasted about a net new demand of 220 units by 2034 over that 10-year time frame. And at the current pace of supply build out, so the current pace of construction, we had forecasted a net unit shortage of just around 70 units or so by 2034. And this point is not specific to the town of Lunenburg, but this goes throughout the county as well. Rental units are expected to represent the bulk of new housing unit demand over that time frame, and we also forecasted substantial demand for non-market and like more affordable housing units. Yeah, a couple just last points on like higher order pictures and like higher order themes from the research. Longer term issues that we identified throughout the county and in the town, just a lack of affordability and an erosion of affordability in like private sector renter stock. That leads to low availability, and it's really constraining. If you're a tenant or a renter household, you don't necessarily have a lot of options if you need to or you want to move somewhere else. You're oftentimes pretty stuck. There's also a high reliance on the secondary market as a major provider of rental inventory throughout the county. Feeding into that as well, funding programs from various levels of government are often misaligned with rural and small town contexts and what the market actually looks like on the ground, which does hamper the build out over time of kind of new non-market supply. And on the private market and the private sector build out side, private market can only do so much to help solve the problems long term. There's a critical need for additional private market supply, but on that flip side of it, they're all going to have a set price floor. It's going to cost a certain amount per unit to bring those sites online, and that market-based housing supply as a result is only ever going to be a partial solution to larger affordability challenges, because it's really unrealistic and unfeasible in a lot of instances to expect the private sector and the private market to provide rental housing at a discount relative to what the market actually can attain. And then in terms of kind of like what can be done over the long term, the biggest thing that we flushed out in our research was that housing is a regional and more kind of like interconnected and interjurisdictional issue. Tenants and renter households are going to follow apartment availability. They're going to go where they can. Their lifestyles aren't just going to stop at jurisdictional boundaries. And as such, especially in like within the county as a whole, where all the 5 municipalities are quite integrated. Interjurisdictional cooperation when it comes to non-market housing, housing research, housing supply projects, what have you, is really important to try to help non-market and more affordable builds get off the ground. Yeah, kind of where is it headed? In the near term, we anticipated in our research a bit of a slowdown, basically in conjunction with a lessened provincial level population growth. And at the same time, there's a bunch of like a lot of projects still kind of in the pipeline and coming online. And that's probably going to lead to a stabilization and a kind of a leveling off of rental rates. Doesn't necessarily mean that prices are going to come down, but we did say in the report that we expect prices to level off in the near to midterm. Over the next 10 years, all 5 jurisdictions are going to have a high demand for rental units. And we do expect, though, that there's going to be a persistent imbalance between total supply and demand, allowing some of those affordability challenges to kind of stick around. This last chunk here is just a quick summation of some of the stakeholder outreach that we did through this research. This is by no means specific to Lunenburg, but the other jurisdictions had this in their presentation, so it's in this presentation for you guys as well. And I just want to flag before we go through the stakeholder outreach section that this isn't necessarily what our firm said about any of these issues. This is a summation of what people told us through the research. So some of the industry stakeholders that we spoke to through this, definitely, well, they were appreciative of municipalities and support, or municipal governments, I should say, and some of the support they'd received on various development projects. They also saw a lot of them sometimes as a barrier to some of the things that they were trying to get off the ground. And this was also true for some non-market and non-profit groups as well. So with the municipal approval frameworks and things like public consultation phases, approval timelines and such, often add like major delays and major complications and regulatory hurdles to housing projects. And that can often lead to increased costs, delayed supply, or projects just not getting off the ground to begin with. Or sometimes the private sector or non-market groups might try to go elsewhere where there's kind of a lower barrier to entry or whatnot. And I'm not standing up here banging a drum about red tape or anything like that, but I'm just reporting what was told to us during our research. Yeah, and another thing that came out through our discussions with various non-market groups, nonprofit groups on the side of getting projects off the ground was that it's quite challenging for them sometimes when they're beholden essentially to 3 orders of government for funding. That leaves them quite vulnerable to delays and policy changes at any level. So that can leave projects kind of hanging in the wind for years at a time. And some of the feedback that we got from the construction and lending sectors is projects undertaken by smaller scale and affordable housing groups are often perceived as like higher risk and low return because they're so dependent on various tiers of government and so many different layers of approvals. These projects often get charged back a premium, which in turn pushes up the cost to get newer affordable units online. And to feed into all of that, when these groups go to lenders or project funders and such, they're often lacking reliable market rental info, which doesn't help their case when they're trying to advocate for why their group should get funding or their project needs help from CMHC or what have you. All right. So yeah, apologies for just kind of like plowing through that. But I was trying to be cognizant of everybody's time. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, and I'm happy to take any questions you guys have. And if there's anything I can't answer in the immediate, I'll happily let you know and see if I can't follow up with you after.
Thank you very much, Colin. So council, does anyone have any questions or comments for Colin? Paul?
Colin, you noted in your report, rental rates on average are $1,326 in Lunenburg. Is that representative of a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, or an aggregate of all of them?
So that was the weighted average as a whole for rental units in Lunenburg. I have the specific unit figures here. If you want to give me a second, I can pull them up.
Yes, please, if you can.
All right. So overall, studio markets or studio units, sorry, 982, 1 bedroom, 1018, 2 bedrooms, 1326, and 3+ bedrooms, 2280.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Any other, Deputy Mayor?
Thanks, Colin, too. Wondering where in your research short-term rentals may have fit. Were they recognized as within either the purpose-built or the secondary market? Were they separated? Were they just excluded? If you can identify that for us or explain that to us, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. Just trying to think about how best to word this. So I'll give you kind of two answers. So the stuff that we looked at on the primary and secondary market side was generally specific to the rental market. And so if people were speaking to us or giving us lease rolls, or if we had data internally for a building, it was specific to that regular side of the rental sphere, not necessarily the short-term rental market side of things. There was a section specific in the report to the short-term rental market. But it was not necessarily like a dedicated and like really focused piece of our research. It was in there because we had the information available, and we were updating several other pieces of the housing needs assessments that were previously done. So we were able to update a few figures on like the overall kind of market trends in that regard for the short-term rental side. So like the rental rate for a 2-bedroom unit that I just gave or something like that wouldn't necessarily reflect figures from the short-term rental side. But we did take a look at it, and we did provide some higher order figures, but it wasn't like a focal point of our research. Does that answer what you needed, or can I go into any more detail?
Well, just to clarify, so is there information regarding short-term rentals in the large report?
Yeah, there is. It'd be in the town of Lunenburg's report there. Actually, I don't know if you guys have the full report with all 5 jurisdictions or not, or just the town specific, but there's a section in there specifically for short-term rentals across the county in the Lunenburg County section. And then in the town of Lunenburg specific piece of that report, there's a dedicated section on short-term rentals in there as well. And there is, I think, at least one point in the conclusion section at the start of the report that does discuss a little bit on the short-term rental side.
So that, but they are excluded from the, like you said, the prices of the rental markets. That when you talk, you're just talking about long-term rentals, not short terms?
Yes, correct.
Perfect.
That is
Thanks.
correct. They wouldn't be part of those rental rates or those vacancy figures.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Gail?
Thanks for this, Colin. Today was my second time reading through this. And in terms of the deputy mayor's question, I know that the one statistic I took out from the larger report about short-term rentals was that across the region, short-term rentals were seen as taking about 45% of the inventory out of the long-term market. And, I thought that for us in Lunenburg, that was a pretty significant number. And that was region wide. But, if those same kind of numbers held true in Lunenburg, then that's a pretty significant number.
Sorry, did you have a question associated with that, or did you want me to comment on it, or?
No, just to comment on that piece of it that the deputy mayor had raised.
Yeah, I don't know if it's 45% of the dwelling stock across the county. I'm happy to discuss like an interpretation of that if you'd like. I don't think our research showed that specific. I'm also happy to follow up with you after just to like discuss this and maybe see if there's some way we could help with the interpretation there.
That would be great because I think later tonight or one of our upcoming meetings, we're going to be discussing short-term rentals and where they can and can't be within our community. So I really think here in town we notice a big impact on short-term rentals. The fact that I don't know if it's 45%. I don't know what the number actually is, but there's at least 60 to 70 short-term rentals within our town. That's our town right now that we can all tell you where they are, that were once either family homes or duplexes or multiple families living in them that are now short-term rentals for 3 months of the year, 2 months of the year in the summer, and that's really affected our housing market. So I don't know what the numbers say, but those of us that live here certainly know that it's a problem. Councilor Fullerton?
Yes, and I'm looking at that section of the report now, and I may have misread it when I quoted that number, but the short-term rentals are addressed on page 57 of your main report.
Yeah, the 45% there, yeah, that refers to the countywide total short-term rental inventory. We estimated that of all short-term rentals in the county, about half of the short-term rental inventory was occupied by like longer term or units that could be potentially construed as longer term dwellings, but that doesn't translate into like 45% of the county's housing unit stock writ large, though I can definitely see how that could be interpreted like that. So yeah, no problem there.
Thank you. And I mean, most of the short-term rentals would definitely not have a positive impact on affordable rentals because they would be, quite expensive, but at least they'd be units. Again, if you use the theory that more supply helps with the demand and brings the cost down, obviously, if you'd even free up 40 single-family dwellings within the town, it should, in essence, drive the pricing down a little bit. But I'm not sure how effective that theory has worked in other communities. Any other comments or questions for Colin? Oh, Councilor Babineau?
Thank you. You had mentioned, Colin, that there were some premiums that showed up in the secondary market. And I was just wondering, is that something that was unique to Lunenburg, or did that show up in any of the other municipalities as well?
I don't think it was unique per se to Lunenburg. It was definitely common amongst some of the secondary market renter or secondary market rentals that we looked at and the operators of some of those secondary market rentals that we spoke with and some of the data that we were able to get. In terms of what, yeah, actually, you know what? I'm not going to comment on whether it is like a Lunenburg specific thing because I don't want to necessarily give you guys the wrong idea. But all I will say is that we were able to like see in the data that we had that there was a consistent premium for a lot of the secondary market rentals in Lunenburg, if that makes sense, without kind of throwing too much mud in the water there.
No, I think I get what you're saying.
Okay.
Any other questions, Councillor Strong?
Through your presentation, you mentioned a couple of caveats. Can you just give me the top 3 caveats from this report?
Sorry, can you clarify about what you mean by that,
Okay,
please?
that some of the information may not be really appropriate or applicable to the town of Lunenburg because I think in one case it was talking to the information came from market providers, but it wasn't really what you had identified.
I'm not necessarily sure about the last bit there, but the biggest caveat I think that was that I brought up and that's in the report itself is that some of the resulting figures, so like vacancy rental rates in the report are influenced by small sample size bias as a result of the just like overall size of the market in the smaller municipalities. For instance, in Lunenburg, if it's a small or just any of the smaller spots, if you have kind of like a building that has more units vacant, it's going to have an outweighed impact on the overall results as a whole. Thereby, it skews it through a small sample size. And we did control for that through our research and through the data collection and through some of the statistical processes that we use to generate these figures. So the biggest caveat I would have is that while the responses and the response rates were high and we were able to determine that they were statistically representative and the like, at the end of the day, it is a small sample size that we're working with. And therefore, small variations can have an outsized impact on the final results.
Thank you. That was great. And is there any rationale for why our area doesn't have CMHC involvement? I know I own an apartment building in Truro and I get a phone call from CMHC annually and I report annually. And sometimes I think I'm being foolish reporting it because that information becomes public. But is there a reason that it isn't, that CMHC hasn't had that success rate in our county?
So a couple things there. Well, first, thank you for reporting the info. It's we use it on a constant basis, and that information is quite helpful. And rest assured that your building specific stuff is not public. As much as I would love to hop on CMHC's portal and be able to select individual buildings and see their lease rolls and everything, unfortunately, it all goes into a blender. So your confidentiality is good and your specific info is never made public. Same deal with this research that we did. Everybody that participated was guaranteed confidentiality, which is part of how we were able to get such like accurate and reliable information. In terms of why Lunenburg isn't covered by CMHC, for fear of misquoting, and I do believe CMHC has a population size threshold that they use to determine which areas they do the rental market survey outreach in. And I think the last time I looked at that, kind of at the start of this research, it was about, I think the cutoff was 10,000 people. I think. Anyway, so it would just be the town of Lunenburg doesn't meet their population size threshold. That's why they don't do the outreach here.
Okay, that's a great explanation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, Deputy Mayor?
Again, you mentioned about the fact, the reality that small change can have an outsized impact on a community our size, and I'm just wondering about the we have 2 purpose-built rental buildings in the town of Lunenburg that are subsidized housing. And I'm just wondering if those are included in your numbers or if they're qualified or if there's how they fit in.
Right. No, sorry, I should have set a point on that earlier. That's my bad. Mea culpa. So we did our best at the outset when we compiled the inventories and like the contact lists and the breakdown of properties in the county. We did our best to exclude as much as possible non-market sites. So that would have been nonprofit-owned buildings, public housing, social housing, co-ops. Anything that really couldn't qualify as like private sector operated rental housing that we can determine. We tried our best to exclude that from our research because the goal of this wasn't necessarily to get information on what like the non-market side of things is currently doing. It was to provide standardized, usable rental market metrics for nonprofits, for developers, for municipal governments. The goal of this research was to quantify what the primary or like what the private market rental scene looked like, not necessarily what kind of non-market operators were charging or what their vacancies looked like or things in that regard. Does that help with the question there?
It does definitely. And I was there did seem to be though not because of your research, but because the results of your research kind of one of the conclusions, which I can't find the reference for right at the moment, but it was basically that it's very difficult for traditional market providers of regular market rental units to provide affordable units. So it just seems that there's a need for more non-market housing to fill that need. So I guess that's just kind of verified through the work that you've done. So thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Anybody else? Well, thank you very much, Colin, for the presentation tonight. And nothing really, surprising in the report, quite frankly. We've been saying all along that, if you really want to get affordable, what you call true affordable housing, it really has to be a partnership with higher levels of government, normally almost a subsidized build. And without that subsidization or partnership, market rent at this point isn't what many of us would call affordable. But, I guess the government's even changing the name to attainable. So, it's just, I'm not sure where this is going to end, but, at least with things sort of flattening out, like you said, or at least getting a little better, hopefully there's some positive in the near future.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate the candid questions. And yeah, if you guys ever have any questions, your staff have full report and everything. And we're happy to provide follow-up on this where need be in the future.
Thank you very much. And you enjoy the sunny evening.
You guys too. And I do see that's a Habs jersey there sitting there too. So good luck as the second round gets going, eh?
Yeah, she's going to be the first person I've ever kicked out of the council chamber. Thank you.
Cheers.
So we'll move on to 7, which is correspondence. That's just there. There's really nothing to action at this time. We'll move on to 8, business arising and unfinished business. There's really nothing there. So we'll move right into 9.1. And I guess this is where we turn the meeting over to Alan.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yes, I'm here today to talk about the rather long report that you received. I do apologize for that, but I think there's a bit of a recognition that there's been a few things on the docket for a while that have sort of come to a bit of a head at this point. So that is part of the reason for the length. Now, I was going to give a presentation, but I was hoping we'd actually engage in a little bit more conversation this evening about what's within the report and some additional details that you may be seeking at this point. The rather verbose motions, series of motions are in front of you. Hopefully you do have those. And hopefully you have read the report despite its length. Thank you. Really what we're looking for today, or Community Development Department, more specifically the Planning and Development function, is really trying to get a little bit of direction on what or the level of review or analysis that council is looking for on our planning documents. And so this would include our municipal planning strategy, our land use bylaw, and our subdivision bylaw, as well as potentially a look at some of our subdivision specs as well too, to address some gaps or potential risks in there as well. We do have a series of items that have been put on the motion action list. We have added to that in Schedule B, I believe. There's been some staff identified amendments as well that we would like to consider. Some of these have been long-standing. They were on Post-it notes when I arrived in this job, and they have remained there because they are still relevant. And I have added to them myself as well too, as we've been going through some various forms of applications that we've been seeing in the town as well too. So there are some things that we can tighten up and perhaps improve upon. So that's the what. So what would you actually like us to be looking at? What level of depth and consideration? And we have a spectrum. We can go from just simply addressing the issues that are on the motion action list, although I have requested that we remove some of them because they are slightly less relevant at this point than perhaps they need to be. And then on the other spectrum is a full plan review where we would engage in a repeal and replace. So we would remove the existing documents in their entirety and adopt new ones. So there is a spectrum of consideration in there and the level of depth that you would like to do. The second component of this is really the how. Do you want it tomorrow? Do you want it? Yes. I think I knew the answer to that question. So, but along with any process that we would be doing with your planning documents, there is a requirement for public participation. We can do the base level. We could have one public participation meeting and have a series of amendments and do that rather quickly. However, what I've tried to highlight in the report is whatever we change does have an impact to how council makes decisions, what they're beholden to. They can potentially open you up to questions, potential legal challenges as well too. So we want to be careful. Also, the planning documents are for everyone who resides in Lunenburg, conducts business in Lunenburg, and chooses to invest here. And so there is, staff would be a little bit more leaning towards the idea of doing a little bit more engagement than that to get a sense of what types of amendments might be sensible. And also to get, it's actually a little bit timely with Colin's presentation regarding municipalities being a barrier. Now, I don't necessarily adhere to that, but there are things that we could potentially improve to see improved investment of the type of investment that we'd be looking for, as well as looking for more non-market housing as well too. That is an option we can bring into this review and would be supported under our funding under the Housing Accelerator Fund at the same time. So again, spectrum on that one. Do you want us to go bare minimum, what's required by law, or would you like us to go, for lack of a better term at this point, whole hog, and do a very thorough engagement process? So there's a spectrum in that as well too. In the report, I've outlined 3 options to sort of address the how with some pros and cons, potential risks associated with that as well too. Again, these are not entirely discrete options. They're simply trying to indicate a level of spectrum that we could undertake. And so with that, I will stop talking and start answering questions.
Thank you. So does anyone have any questions or comments? I just like to start by thanking you very much for this detailed report. And again, we have been asking for this for, I guess, 1.5 years now. And I'm happy to hear your thoughts on engagement. I think that's a very important part of the next step, because I think the document that was created in 2021. That was part of the problem, and it was nobody's fault, but we were all in lockdown. And in a town like Lunenburg, it's hard to get full engagement when everything's on Zoom. We have an older population that a lot of them don't use Zoom, and to be quite frank, in 2021, most people weren't concerned about what the town of Lunenburg was doing for bylaw changes or planning changes. They were dealing with bigger issues, wondering if their loved ones were going to, according to the media, if they were still going to be here the next day or if they're going to have a job or to be able to pay bills. So again, I think that when we do review and revise these two documents, that it's very important that we at least have the opportunity for public engagement, because as you can see, not always do we get a lot of public engagement at our meetings, but I think for a document of this magnitude, we certainly will, and I think it is very important. So thank you, Alan. Does anybody have any questions for Alan at this time or comments? Deputy Mayor.
I have lots of questions, but I'm just thinking that maybe we can tackle this in a sort of systematic way to enable discussion on each of the recommendations that were presented. So not sure where to start. There's the background, and then there's some. And in that discussion or in that background information, I would even go so far as to suggest that some of the information has been very conservatively identified, but I think it's fair to say that we recognize that it was great to see the number of items that were listed in housekeeping. I don't know if that's what you called them exactly, but staff identified amendments to the planning documents. It's obvious that there are a lot of amendments that are required. They're through use of the very fairly recently revised or new documents. Actually, they're brand new, right? So as of 2021, it's been recognized that there are problems, hurdles that people have encountered when trying to use them that are not helpful, to the point of trying to streamline and make things easier for people. There are points of confusion. Interpretation is, not helped. Things like the height minimum for Main Street form zone. We've just gotten had some inquiries from a potential developer who has problems with that. And this is not the first time that we have encountered that. And you are newer to this than we are on council. And we're relatively new to working with these documents. There's also the, there's another one there. Oh, loved to see the recommendation to remove the conditions that tie the review of the MPS to the comprehensive community plan, which is something that we've been talking about as a council since we were elected. So definitely there are things we've just been waiting for the opportunity to have them addressed. The vending bylaw as well is identified by staff as something that needs to be done, and something that we've encountered in working with the business community here. So lots of meat here, lots of things that we want to see addressed. And I think if we can help identify where the highest priorities are by having a discussion about some of them along the way. So starting with the first recommendation, perhaps. Trying to find, about development agreements, the first, and the fact that it was originally development agreements on town-owned land, and there's some very good advice around that's not particularly helpful. And so that perhaps that's something that can come off, and we can look at development agreements as a discretionary tool that could be beefed up in more practical, useful ways, and also perhaps the site plan approval as another tool to be incorporated. So, I mean, let's just start with that, if we could.
Through the chair, are you requesting just a general discussion on those items, or?
Yeah, I am. I'm happy. I'd like to hear how my council colleagues feel about that part of what was presented in the report, and if there's full support for the recommendation that's provided.
Any other comments from Councilor Babineau?
Yeah, I'll just dive in with what Rachel just suggested. So the very first recommendation in the report, which it has two items. One is related to the parking spots in front yards. I would support both of those, removing both of those from the motion action list. And with regards to development agreements, I would agree with the deputy mayor that looking at those as a bigger tool in our toolkit as opposed to just having them be on town-owned land, that appeals to me for sure. So,
Anybody else? Councilor Strong.
I agree with both my colleagues on recommendation one. I think they were brought up to deal with specific issues that were going on at the time, and I think that we need to move on from those specific issues and look at recommendation two.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Deputy Mayor?
I just want to clarify, I guess, for peace of mind with regard to the 5 parking spaces. And I think if I've understood the report correctly, the concern for that particular piece of property can be accommodated in other ways through the documents that we have in place. Is that right?
Yes, through the chair, to the deputy. Yeah, upon review of that particular circumstance, so the development officer does have some discretion in terms of allowing for the parking to go, if it can't be. So the intent of the parking as it's drafted and the parking provisions within this plan are progressive in some respects, confusing in others, depending on the context. So the intent really is to try to discourage parking being the dominant feature on the street for a variety of reasons that were outlined within the report. In cases where there's a need for additional parking, the development officer has a discretion to allow for that in the side yard, the flankage yard in some cases, or the rear yard. So the parking can be accommodated there, and if it can't be accommodated there, then it can be moved to the front. And so it's a mechanism that's context sensitive to deal with situations that may not accommodate exactly what we're looking for. So the way the regulation functions at this stage, it is quite flexible, and yes, we could deal with that as is.
Deputy Mayor?
If I can just follow up while we have that property in mind. It seemed to be, as I recall, there was some concern about landscaping requirements for the property approval too, that have been left unmet because of the expectation that something was going to be done to improve the situation that everyone's experiencing. So does that get changed a bit, or have I misunderstood, or how does that get handled?
Through the chair to the deputy. So the way the provision is drafted, there is a requirement for some consideration of landscaping within that feature. But again, the discretion is with the development officer to deal with the context. And so the intent is to provide for parking in a safe manner to allow for it appropriately for the development. So, yeah.
Thank you. I guess my question would be this seems so simple, the way you explain it and the way it's allowed. So why have we struggled with this I've been struggling with it for 2.5 years. Was it just misinterpretation by previous folks or, because I'm really confused now.
To the chair. I honestly, a large part of doing this work was going back in time and trying to understand the conversations around some of these issues. I'm not sure precisely why this was arrived at, given that the documents were already in place. The problem, again, with any of these documents is they're open to some level of interpretation. And so someone may take issue with my interpretation. You're all free to do so. But as a licensed professional planner, my review of this document is that yes, we are unable to allow for that. So.
No, thank you. If anything, I'm very happy to hear your recommendation. But again, I've been here for 2.5 years, and this has been an issue that we haven't been able to solve. So, thank you for bringing this forward. So, are we prepared to? Is someone prepared to recommendation 1? Can we move it to council? Because that's what we have to do. We have to move it to the next council meeting, right? Go ahead, Councilor Fullerton.
Thank you. Recommendation number 1, that council directs staff to update the motion action list as indicated.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councilor Strong. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carry unanimously. Okay, so now we'll move on to amendment 2, I'd say the way we should go with this. So amendment 2 is well, that's actually the 5 parking spots. So we have already recommendation 2 then. Someone want to move that at this point? We can discuss it first. And then we'll move it to, because we have to move it to, we basically discussed a bunch of things, but we do have to move it to council, but we can discuss it now, but we can't make any decisions. Any comments? No comments from anybody? I mean, I love the suggestions, quite frankly, on here for short-term rentals. Once again, this is something that I've been asking for 2.5 years, and it always seemed to be a bigger issue than it seems to actually be, to be quite honest. So again, I want to thank you very much for taking that item again from the motion action list and moving it to actually action rather than motion. So again, thank you very much, because this is something that has been, certainly the 2 times I went door to door in a short period, everybody was talking about short-term rentals, except those that own short-term rentals. So again, I thank you for getting that to the action category. So is someone, Deputy Mayor?
Well, since you raised the short-term rental topic as part of recommendation 2, I guess, analysis of short-term rental regulations. And there were a number of things to amend or to look at with those, which was restrict to primary residence, restrict to commercial use zones, evaluate the merits of short-term rental business licensing bylaw. And then there was some discussion of that in the report and some recommendations. And this committee of the whole is our opportunity to kind of talk about some of these things, to flesh out for the benefit of staff and their further work with regard to this as to how much effort or what we're looking for with this. And I think it's going to be important in the analysis part to look what's been in place and in practice in other municipal units to date, because we're kind of getting late to the game as far as our the only restriction is that currently is that it's one per property. Is that how it is? One per, and that restricts it from being in a accessory building. And I've yet to understand why that was, I get the one, why they restrict it from an accessory building. I have no idea what the rationale is, if there was one provided, but that's a point of discussion for me.
In response to the chair, to the deputy, I am uncertain as to why the condition for accessory dwellings was established. The rationale is not overly clear within the plan, which is where it should be. It's usually our guidance on those matters. And yes, it is, you're permitted one per parcel, so, or lot is the way it's phrased. So.
But it is currently allowed in all zones, and as the current documents provide, yes.
Through the chair to the deputy. I don't have it entirely memorized, but generally speaking, all residential areas and all commercial areas. So industrial would be the one that would be excluded. So.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Babineau.
So just for me on this one, if you sort of scroll down further in the report to some of the background for that particular recommendation, Alan has written here that an outstanding question is what the intention of the motion was. And I think that might be a good discussion point, because that will probably sort of funnel the analysis in a certain direction. I will say, I think that the rationale for your recommendations here are really great, and I agree with them in terms of like restricting it to primary residences and then sort of evaluating the merits of the licensing bylaw, but maybe not going with restricting them to the commercial use zones, because it seems like that's going to have more cons than pros. So I definitely agree with that. And I think for me, it was not, the intention of the motion was not to prohibit short-term rentals, but really to regulate them, to pay attention to them and to regulate them. And because I think anytime you have an industry that crops up that goes unregulated for too long, you run into issues, which is what we're seeing now. So that for me was the intention.
Deputy Mayor.
Likewise, yeah, very much so. And likewise, the commercial use zone was just an idea to be explored. And again, looking at other municipal units and what may have worked and what may have not worked is helpful. But to the point of identifying what the problem to be addressed is, I believe it is very much community and neighborhood impact, negative impact that has been experienced and has been identified, and also negative impact on housing stock. So those are the full-time housing stock. Those are the two issues that were of concern. So I do like the one provision of one per property, because when we have, and I don't know how this works, it should still work in the commercial zone, when we have multiple units, housing units above a commercial, in the commercial zone, one can be a short-term rental, but only one. So that opens up the other rental spaces for long-term housing options. And I know that hadn't been the case in some of our downtown properties, for example. So I think that's important.
Councillor Fullerton.
Yeah, with the short-term rental item, I think that the timing is really great to be tackling this, because we have a little bit of information from the housing market study that was done region-wide. We also have a short-term levy, a short-term accommodation levy in the works. And I think that to put it all together in a way that makes sense, that the one doesn't contradict the other, it's a good opportunity.
Thank you. Councillor Babineau.
So just to the deputy mayor's point about like the example that you used of we've got units above a business. If we were to restrict them to primary residences, I mean, I agree with one per lot as well, like 100%. But I guess would that mean that it would only work if there were 2 units and one of the units was the person's primary residence?
Good question. And my interpretation of that would be, or my resolution for that would be, is restricted to primary residence in residential zones. So in a commercial zone, you could still have one. It's still one per property, but you would be allowed one short term, and the others would then be long term. So that doesn't sound right, the right term. So the primary residence piece would be for the residential zone. So that we're not saying they can't happen in residential zones, but if they happen in residential zones, it's because it's your primary residence, and it's not because you're a foreign owner and this is a lovely piece of property that you can rent out like a hotel, on Brook Street. So that would be my take. And I see nodding. So could it be approached that way, or am I off base, or?
Through the chair to both councillors, we can contextualize it to the degree that we want. And so if we want to treat it as one per parcel, regardless of where it is, we can specify primary residence in one case, not in the other. We get to craft it the way that we choose. So.
And the definition of short-term rentals in Nova Scotia is 30 days or less, right? Am I not mistaken?
Yes.
Okay. Then I have another question, I guess, also for you, is the example the deputy mayor used of commercial buildings in Lunenburg that have converted the second and third floors into residential units, which is what we were hoping for over the last 2 to 3 seasons. I'd say those units were always long. They were rentals. They were apartments for people to live here. And, I could list you off, I'm not about to, but I could list you off 4 or 5 of those properties that subsequently have now converted to the fact that they're sitting there vacant for about 8 months of the year, and they're now Airbnb to VRBO'd, like from now until the end of October. So it takes them out of the long-term rental market, which is what they were intended to be and what they always were. But because of our popularity tourism-wise in the summer, they can make as much in a week as they will in a month in the downtown core when they're doing that. So I guess my question would be, we can sit here all year and make rules and regulations, but how are we going to enforce that? Because we also look at the list of registered short-term rentals in the town, and that's quite frankly a joke. Like, there's that many in certain blocks of Old Town. So unless we have some way of enforcing it or checking in on it, we're going to waste a whole lot of time here, and they're still going to do it. Because I can give you 4 examples right now, and I can give you an example of some buildings that were recently purchased. And the intent is going to be to switch them from long-term apartments to short-term motel, hotel style housing units. So that's going to take, again, we just heard a housing study. That's going to take a potential of, whatever, 8, 10, 12 apartments that people are currently living in off the market and made into, say, hotel or motel rooms. So how are we going to enforce that or prevent that? Because I know there's been some things done, purchases made recently that's definitely the plan.
To the chair, the issue with any regulation that you bring in, and you've poked a big hole in any regulation, is it's only as good as far as people want to be compliant with it and your ability to regulate and enforce. Enforcement is a challenge, in particular where we don't have accurate data. data is lacking. It varies from month to month based on the information we receive from the province about what is registered and what is not. Staff, as part of this, are intending to go back and look at what applications have been and what has been approved and what is active. We just haven't had space to really fundamentally do that. The other sort of concern, I think, sorry, I've totally lost my train of thought there. If we do go with the additional component of that motion around a licensing program, that does give us more information fundamentally. And so once we have a licensing regime of our own, if we're unable to do what we would like to do, then that gives us a mechanism for better enforcement, because as of right now, we do our best. So.
Yeah, I guess the reason I raised that is because a traditional Airbnb or B&B is your primary resident, and you can rent out rooms, and you can rent out, I think it's up to 4 or 5, and then it becomes an inn. But you have to have the primary owner living in the building. So there's 1 or 2 in town, in the downtown core, that's actually had to do that recently in order to qualify for their licensing. But there's also multiple other buildings that have been, changed hands in the last 12 months, that the intent is to make short-term rentals out of what are now apartments. And there will be no primary resident, to my knowledge, living in those buildings. So I can just see this coming to our table very soon. So how do we deal with that? Because I'm quite sure those purchases have been made with a plan in place. So I guess that's why I ask, because this isn't going to be, a nice topic to talk about with a developer who just probably invested quite a bit of money in that area. Deputy Mayor?
And two, just, I'm not sure I'm clear, because I think part of the problem is as was pointed out, the province's definition of short-term rental and our reality of what is happening with the short-term rental market. So if they rent for 32 days, they're not considered a short-term rental. So is there any mechanism with the licensing mechanism, I guess what I'm trying to say, even be applicable, or could it be designed to capture some of that, even in a way so that we understand what the rental market is in the community somehow?
Through the chair to the deputy, that is a difficult question. So the licensing mechanism that we would have under the MGA is outside of sections 8 and 9. And so they are not something that we would be, in this instance, privy to do under our planning documents. They don't apply. It would be a business licensing program. Again, we can address these things over time. They won't be immediately able to address them because these things take time. Yeah, it might be challenging. So I think that's kind of where I'll leave it.
Yes, because many are registered businesses and inns at this point. But again, I think that some have plans to turn many more into those types of developments. So rather than going the way I think that we want to go with our direction in housing, really what's going to be taking place in that area is going to be the opposite of the direction we want to go, because there are probably 8 or 10 year-round apartments people living in that are all being removed for short. And when I say short-term rentals, it's not 29 nights, it's 1 or 2 nights. It's a hotel. So again, I know that's currently going down. So how do we deal with that? I guess from a council's perspective, I ask.
To the chair, you don't deal with it through the binding documents fundamentally. So I know I can speak to that in regards to other enforcement activities. Again, from planning department's perspective, if we don't see an application, to us, it realistically doesn't exist. we don't do a lot of proactive enforcement in that respect. If it's a building bylaw issue, then we would send out the building official. In this case, it's, yeah, when it's raised, then we can go and speak to them. But absent that being brought forward in evidence, and there's not much we can really do in that respect. We can try to enforce the land use bylaw as it stands. So, but to prohibit it proactively, that's a different situation.
Yeah, so if we changed anything at this point, we would have to somewhat grandfather those that are in existence, or at least make some type of an amendment, or what, how would we deal, or give them, like, I think Halifax gave them like a year to convert their short-term rentals into long-term. So we'd have to do something similar to these owners, would we not?
Through the chair, in the documentation, it talks about grandfathering the existing units in. They wouldn't automatically be thrown out. So if that helps, I don't know.
In response to the chair and the councillor, so what the report was trying to highlight is if we change the planning documents to have different conditions, it doesn't affect the current ones. We would be looking forward. With a licensing regime, then we can set a timeline, same to the marketing levy, and go back in time to some respect and address those ones. And so they're two separate mechanisms. One will only apply forward, one can go back to some extent and have those conditions reviewed every year. So.
No, that's great. I just hate to be, because I want us to deal with short-term rentals, but I just wanted to let the council know that we're dipping our toes into a little bit of muddy waters in certain areas. Councilor Babineau?
Oh, well, I was just going to say further to that is, I mean, of course you run the risk of upsetting people when you make changes like this, but as it kind of speaks about in the report, this is going to take a long time and it's going to require a lot of public engagement. So it's anyone who's in process will be aware of what's coming, right? It's not going to be a rug pulled out from under them unless they're just really not paying any attention. So.
And through you, Chair, one of the other things you're going to be looking at is the classifications of this. Are they short-term rentals, or are they motels across multiple buildings under one business? So that's something else that has to be taken into consideration when we're looking at this, and those avenues of how do we address short-term rentals if it's now classified as a motel of multiple buildings?
Deputy Mayor.
Is that not a separate issue, though? If it's a commercial operation, if they are running as a motel, they should be taxed and identified as commercial operators. Am I being too simplistic in that? Just.
All right. I'm waiting for Tyson to chime in here. I can't really speak to the assessment component. That's not really, that's something I would defer to other staff, but we do allow for, commercial accommodations. And so if they are a commercial accommodation, we would hope that they would come forward with an application that would be approved, meet all the standards, whatever additional provincial requirements they would meet. The short-term rental is sort of a gray area. So.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that we have to explore if we move on in this, is the fact that I think that's that would be one of the big deterrents if you were able to tax short-term rentals the commercial rate. Because quite frankly, if you're renting, I don't care if it's a whole house for 2 days, you're competing against the top mast that's renting a room for 2 days. The top mast pays commercial taxes, and Johnny back of town pays residential taxes, and there's no one really living in the house. So I do think that's something we should be exploring. For whatever reason, the province has sort of not tackled that issue yet. They've tried a lot of other things that they've pulled back on, but that's one issue that I've been saying for years. One of the easiest ways to curb the massive short-term rental influx into a community is start charging them commercial taxes. And if they flip over to an apartment, yearly rental, then obviously they're not taxed commercial, they're taxed residential because that's what they are. In fact, if they rent for anything more than 30 days, they classify as a residential under the province of Nova Scotia. But again, I don't know how anyone can argue that you're renting a house to 25 different people in a month, that they're not a business. They're competing against the same people that are actually running a business. So again, that's an issue that I think we'll have to take into consideration, and I'm sure we'll hear about if we recommendation number 2, to direct staff to bring back some information on the following. So is someone prepared to move that? Councillor Babineau, seconded by Councillor Fullerton. Sorry. Yeah, I think I don't think we want to limit them just to commercial zones. I don't think, I think that no. So you just want to take that part out then. Okay. So you guys good with that? Okay. So there's a motion made, taking C out. So all those in favor, we're not making a motion. This is to send it back to council. I'm sorry. Yep. So, okay. Motion to send it back to council. Everyone good with sending it back to council then? Good. So all those in favor? Okay, thank you. So now we'll move on. Deputy Mayor?
Sorry. There was lots of discussion on the short-term rental thing. The staff identified housekeeping amendments in Schedule B. Is staff looking for any refinement of that, or is that okay to come at a further discussion? Because there was quite a long list, and I don't know if they're all, yeah. I know there's some for me that are very high priority, but I don't work with the documents every day, so.
Through the chair to the councillor, this is actually mostly just a sample of some of the things that we would like to tackle. They were items that were perhaps a little bit more accessible in terms of explaining them, as opposed to all the finer details that are within the documents. So these are more high ticket items, but there's a number of essentially just rephrasings to try to fix up some ambiguity within the documents as well too. There are just too many to list. So.
And then further, the recommendation, the third one about, is that what we were moving on to, about which option? Okay, thanks.
Okay, so recommendation 1 and 2 have passed, if I'm not mistaken. So we're now on to recommendation 3. So we're going to go through the report, or?
There is a condensed version of it under Schedule C of the report as well.
Yeah, I know that.
So can we, with these 3 options, can we talk a little bit about capacity and budgeting?
So Alan, do you want to just touch on just an explanation of the processes, and then I can talk?
Again, the discussion, the options are really sort of presented as a gradient. So starting with, we have some requirements under the Municipal Government Act and under, I'm always get this wrong, their Public Participation Planning Program Policy. I am a fan of alliteration. And that we could probably bring a package, we would essentially meet the intents of what the legal requirements would be with one meeting. Now, is that an appropriate way to deal with something that's comprehensive? Staff do not believe so. At the other end is a very comprehensive level of engagement. This would it can entail anything from surveys, pop-ups, special interest groups, meetings, those sorts of things. Led a lot of those over the course of my career, and they vary depending on the level of complexity and the issues. Essentially, what you're trying to drive at in those cases is that people understand what they're seeing in front of them, and they do have are able to have at least a partially informed understanding of what they may be subject to some degree. So really, we can do a bare minimum and get through this. All the work will be essentially staff drafting and then moving it through the process from the public participation through to first reading, public hearing, on to the province, dealing with them, and then bringing it into force. We can do it that way. Not advised, but is an option. So,
Mayor?
I mean, to that point, review of these documents was identified by this council as our second highest priority or very high priority for us. So I believe from discussion about this previously with my colleagues is that it's of an urgent nature as much as it can be. Recognizing that I don't think we want to take shortcuts as far as engagement is concerned. Engagement is incredibly important. And we want to ensure that anyone impacted by the changes have an opportunity to recognize that what that might look like for them and weigh in. And so, but we have a budget, we have, the resources that we have. I think there's some flexibility within our budget to outsource some extra help to get the work done if need be. But I think we forge ahead. My thought is that we would forge ahead and try to deal with that with the capacity that we have and the flexibility that we have in our budget.
Yes, for when I read the three options, I think option 2 is basically where I would hang my hat. It's basically we're meeting the public engagement part. It's not going to cost us a lot more money. We're doing it internally, but we'll need probably some consultant support, which I think we had money in the budget for this because it was a priority. Go ahead, Paul.
So through you, Chair, you would actually be looking at the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is part of what this whole process is you can use some of those funds to use and do reviews of your bylaws, updates, and changes. So that's a pot of fund that's sitting there. It is in budget that you have discretion on how you would like to use or not accordingly for projects just like this.
Yeah, and I think option 2 also meets both requirements. I think we would have public engagement as much as we feel necessary once we enter into the project and move along, but we'd also speed it up a bit from option 3. Option 3 is probably something that would be passing at the end of this term, the way it's probably going to go. So I think there is some urgency in some of the things we want changed. So if we're going to do a complete overhaul of these, which it sounds like we're going to, but doing it option 2 is the way to go, because some of these issues we've been talking about now for 18 months and we're still dealing with them. So I think we can wait 6 to 8 months or so, or maybe even close to a year to get these done, but we can't do a year and a half, 2 years, because we might not be sitting here at that point. So my suggestion, because I'm not allowed to make a recommendation, would be to go with option 2 at this point, but that's totally up to the folks around the table. Councilor Babineau?
Oh, I was just going to say, I agree. I mean, option 3 for the sort of full meal deal, shall we say, of repealing them and replacing them. I mean, that's aspirational for sure, but that would be something that we would be foisting the end of that off on the next iteration of council. And I'd rather see us get what we've decided as is a priority done within our term. So, and I think option B kind of gives us the best of both, or option two. I don't know why I keep saying B. Anyways, I agree.
Counselor Fullerton?
Yes, and option two for me is it seems like it's practically, it gives everyone some clarity about what they're looking at and what we're using as a go forward plan. And it is it's a much more tolerable timeline to get some of it completed. So yes, I agree with option two.
Just for clarification through you, Chair, as it comes to funding options with this, I think it's important that we take the time to plan it out and review the sections that the department needs support with as consultants and reach out. And we can bring those items forward to council for approval so that you understand the volume of work as well as the costing associated with it. Right now, we don't have a determined amount of funds, but we would like to at least do it section by section so that we're ensuring we're getting the results we need to make sure that council is being well informed and that we're doing our due diligence for the public.
Counselor Daphne?
Paul, how long will it take to find a consultant group?
Through you, Chair, realistically not too long. It's about the level of RFP we put out and how because we have to publicly source it. There are some options we can do, and that's basically we would have to follow our procurement process. So depending on how quick we can turn around or council's options at an upcoming council meeting for direction, from there it would be staff to work on those next steps to bring forward our processes within an RFP scenario based on the timeline that we're looking at here. Probably under, it depends, most RFPs can be out for 3 weeks, they could be out for a month, they could be out for 2 weeks. It really just depends on the threshold and timeline of how quick we want to see a turnaround with.
Deputy Mayor?
I'm all on board with option two as well, as I think I said before, but I'm a little concerned. I'd like to, as we go forward and as this moves ahead, see, as was kind of suggested, sort of a more detailed plan and what pieces are being handled in-house and what pieces we may have to outsource. You know, as was mentioned, our senior planner is very capable. So, and I think it's more meaningful whenever possible to have that face-to-face with and sort of immediate impact, but recognizing that there are capacity issues because there may be other ways to alleviate that problem, the problem with capacity. So, I'm not sure I'm all in on the consultant route at this point. That's kind of what I'm trying to say, but if need be, then let's see how it will roll out. That's so option B for now, and then we'll look at the finer details as we move forward.
Okay, so first of all, Rocket Richard has to turn the mic off. And, is someone prepared to make that recommendation? Councilor Fullerton?
Where to go? Oh.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so recommendation number 3. Help me out here. Where is it? Oh, you got it there. Oh, yeah, no, that I have. Okay, so for recommendation number 3, option 2 is the direction that council would like staff to take.
Okay, it's moved for option 2. Is there a seconder? Councilor Strong, any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried unanimous. Again, Alan, I just want to thank you very much for that detailed report. And I apologize for maybe putting you on the spot for some of them questions. But I'm sure when this goes to the next phase, we can all be prepared to have a full house, I think, to comment on this. So again, thank you very much. So next is the social media policy, another short item tonight. So Kayla.
I'll get that later. Okay, I got it.
So thank you very much. So tonight we're introducing a social media policy at Committee of the Whole. So for your thoughts, edits, input. So as you well know, the town uses social media to share information, updates about meetings, third-party events and stuff like that, but we don't actually have a policy to regulate how we use this. So we have our best practices that we've been using. So what we're trying to do now is take what we do currently do operationally and what we aspire to do to streamline it a little bit and just capture that into a policy. So here we have covering how we monitor comments, what we promote from outside groups, what we don't post at all, and then a little bit on professional conduct of both staff and elected officials. And accompanying the draft policy is also the administrative procedures, which are approved by the CAO, but really show how we operationalize that policy. So you have the draft there in front of you. So I'll leave it to you folks, and we're happy to answer questions or go through specific sections of the policy.
Okay, so how does everyone want to move forward on this? I mean, I'm going to throw this out there. We've been here for 2 hours, which I didn't think we would be, and I think this is going to be quite a discussion, quite frankly. So I would suggest, if everybody's okay with this, is possibly taking this social media policy and giving us a chance to go through it thoroughly, email some suggestions in, and maybe putting it on future agenda, even if it goes to a council meeting to discuss, not the next, like skip over and go to like the 26th or whatever the next meeting is, and do it at that point to give us all enough time to read this, digest it, email any of your comments to Kayla or to Paul, and then we can have a good thorough discussion on the 26th. And because I really think that once you hit the 2 hour mark, people start to, make, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have one comment to make on it too that I wrote on it, but I mean, it's up to you folks. We can continue if you want. I'm okay with that, but I know one person sitting here with a jersey on wants to be home soon. So, anyways, oh, okay, they're not going to lose tonight. Okay, so, so yeah, go ahead.
I think this is really well drafted and maybe more than what I expected to be drafted, and very timely in light of the Federation meeting this past week that has identified a lot of disuse of social media, targeting counselors, and we heard from people that are not reoffering because of social media content that appears on their line. The one thing that really stood out for me was 6.3, use of comments and formal input. And I don't want to get into it very long, but I think this is an opportunity to ensure transparency in decision-making, and that should be in that use of comments and formal. It should be part of the heading and part of the education of the community in letting them know that we don't use social media to discuss politics, to collect information, to make decisions, and all of that kind of stuff. So I would like to see that in there and then discuss it at a future council meeting.
Yeah, I will say the overwhelming majority of municipalities and even councilors and mayors and wardens on their own personal pages are now going to no comments. They're removing the comment section. And that was made very clear at the session on Thursday afternoon or Friday morning. I mean, again, this is the 6th or 7th conference I've been doing the last couple of years, and it's always an hour or two session on social media lately. Unfortunately, the more it's brought up, the worse it's getting, quite frankly. There's been no real solution, but the one solution most people are saying has helped them sleep at night and get through the day was taking the comment section off their posts. We had examples of counselors stand up and tell us personally that they couldn't sleep, they were depressed, they were, stressed, and then they took off the comment section, they made a post, and their life has changed in the last, say, 2 months significantly. So again, if we do that, which I think it's something we should definitely do, the community should know why. There's comments that we're going to make, and there'll be numbers or contacts or emails there for people to reach out directly to those that can answer the questions that actually know the answers, and go from there. And none of us post our posts to be slandered or crucified. So it was actually really sad to hear a couple different counselors stand up and tell us their stories about why they're either not reoffering or they wish they wouldn't have ran. And it's really sad because it wasn't like this 20 years ago when I sat around this table, but not everybody had a cell phone. So, Deputy Mayor?
I just want to layer on that actually, because it's been my personal practice, and this comes from honestly years of experience and in dealing with social media as an elected official. I didn't know or didn't use all the tools at my disposal in my first time around, and I come back with fresh perspective, and that's the first thing I limit is my interaction on social media. With respect to all of the necessary parameters that we try to put around what comments appear on our page, I would personally recommend that all that just simply be eliminated, that we adopt the practice that is we've adopted with our electric utility, so that so that social media is used for what it's best at, and that is to disseminate information, to share information, to try to make sure people know what's going on, that people know in a very timely way what's going on when it's appropriate. But it is not set up, as I think is mentioned in here, to really have productive dialogue. Sometimes you can get good questions asked, but then it requires dedicated staff time and monitoring it. We have until recently, we didn't have a communication person dedicated or who would even have been able to be tasked with that. So it's a big drain on resources. It's a big drain on staff time, and I don't think it's helpful. So that does not mean we don't want to engage with the citizenship or our citizens and or anybody else that has an interest in the town of Lunenburg, but there are other ways that are more effective to have communication than through social media. So it would be my recommendation that we eliminate or turn off the comment section and use the tool for what it's best at.
Paul?
Sorry, through you, Chair, I just wanted to clarify on that. We're finding that it is important, like we see the good questions that are coming from it, but they're not necessarily getting funneled to the right department or the right person. So really emphasizing in our posts who's the contact, who you should reach out for, so that those that have those key questions can get those answered. And if it's something we can determine that should be out to a more public post, something we can edit that post for further clarification and structure as a bulletin board or as an information sharing space, but not a back and forth conversation area. If we want to do that, we can do that through email, we can do that through phone, and we can do that through meetings with staff at town hall.
Agreed. It's also not fair to our staff to get texts from one of us at 10:15 on a Saturday night because somebody's responded to one of our posts or made a comment on one of our posts that just isn't appropriate. So all of a sudden we're texting our communications officer at like 10:15 on a Saturday night that he should not even have to respond if he doesn't want to, take that down now type of thing. Or did you see that? That's not really fair to anybody. So again, I do think that we should just make it a standard practice that take it off the comments. But Councillor Daphne?
I look forward to this discussion later. I had notes for tonight, but I'll hold on to them. I will say though, what you say online and when you get ugly online is a true representative of who you are. And you're not just being that ugly person to one person that you're replying to. Everybody's seeing that. And any good that you may have done in your past life, past months, you've erased it. And the other thing is, Kids talk. Kids listen to parents. Kids go to school. Kids talk to other kids. And all of a sudden they're hearing that their parents are bad people. That's not okay. Not okay. And yeah, I'll have more comments later.
Councilor Babineau?
I didn't realize we were going to get into the weeds here with the turning off comments thing, which I will just say I have suggested to some of us before. So I think it's a bold move, but I think sometimes bold moves are required. Generally speaking, I think this policy is great. I think it's really just a way to formalize what it sounds like we've already been doing, and put it into policy, which I'm a fan of. But yeah, I would also be happy to sort of move this to a public council meeting and see what comes of that.
Okay, and I'd just like to say another thing that a colleague of mine that's been a mayor much longer than I certainly have said at the NSFM conference last week, and that was that if every one of us around here look at our job description and what we put our name on a ballot for, it's basically, we are policymakers. We're in charge of public safety, infrastructure, bylaws, things of that nature. And we are not elected officials, and we did not apply or run to be publicly abused or harassed on social media. That is not in our job description, and that is not actually part of our job. So those people that want to post on Facebook that or any other social media site that we were elected officials and we should be able to take the heat that we saw coming, that's completely false. And it's not actually in the job description. And making those statements is one way to eventually destroy democracy the way this country has seen democracy for many years, because you will not get decent people putting their name on a ballot when it doesn't only impact them, but it also impacts their friends and family around them. And that's what upsets me more when I see certain posts. People can come at me all they want, right? But when my daughter or my son or my nephews or nieces read it on social media and get upset, that's what really upsets me with it. So, from now on, if I'm going to share an event or anything like that, I'm going to take off the comments on my posts as well, for the most part, if it's a town council related thing, for sure. Because even when we do great things here in this community, someone seems to find fault with it. Anything from a special flag raising ceremony to a family events, people always seem to find fault with something. So again, putting the comments off will annoy some people, but oh well. So if we're all in favor of moving this forward to a public meeting, are you guys good with that? Okay, that's what we're going to do then. Oh, we need a motion.
But also just looking to confirm, I've heard everyone loud and clear on the table, but I'm thinking for the May 26th meeting, we could bring back a new updated version of this policy that establishes that the default would be comments off. And then you'll see a removal of quite a few of the clauses there, as a lot of the work of this policy is trying to regulate disrespectful or derogatory remarks. So it'd actually just be a shorter and simpler policy if we go that way. So we can have this version that still exists, but from what I'm hearing on the table, we'll bring back an updated version that proposes comments off.
We good with that? Councilor Fullerton.
Did somebody else make the motion yet?
No.
I will.
So moving, Councilor Fullerton. I thought you wanted to say something. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councilor Babineau. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried unanimous. I think I'll turn my comments off tonight when I go home after this meeting. Okay. We'll move on to item 10, notice of motion, request council reports, etc. This is committee of the whole. We don't normally do council reports, but we certainly can. We'll start at the right. Councilor Strong.
And I will be very brief. I know there's been a lot going on, and I expect my fellow councilors to report in on that. But I wanted to wish a very happy birthday to Michael Kim. Today is his birthday, and a late belated happy birthday to Rachel Martin.
Councilor Daphne.
Go Habs.
Deputy Mayor.
I just wanted to acknowledge, and I think, I'm not sure, I just noticed on Facebook, because it's very good for information, that it was Red Dress Day today. And that's not something we've always known. I know that we haven't always not acknowledged, but it is a very significant day. So I just want to bring that to everyone's attention.
Thank you, Councillor Fullerton.
Nothing to report.
Councillor Green.
Essentially more just a notice of reporting at the next meeting that hopefully Councillor Daphne may find some disappointment in that garment that she's wearing. And I say garment loosely.
Do you want to make a bet or something here?
Let's go, Councillor.
Councillor Babineau.
How could I compete? No, I have nothing to report.
I just want to thank my colleagues that went to Yarmouth with me this past week. We had some really great sessions. It was actually, they lost power while we were there. I thought we were the only place that just lost power in a whim, but they lost power for about 4 hours. But the show still went on. They actually had a beautiful social evening with candles. And to be quite frank, it was a nicer setting when the power was off than when on, right? So again, we learned a lot. It was a great conference, and I look forward to attending more conferences in the future like that, because it's nice to hear that the pros and cons or the positives and negatives that we experience isn't just, we don't own those rights. Like every municipality and every elected official are experiencing the same issues that we're experiencing here in Lunenburg. So again, thank you very much. It was a great 2.5 days in Yarmouth. There's nothing under closed session, so motion for adjournment. Moved by Councillor Fullerton, seconded by Councillor Babineau. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great evening.